Okay, so one of the questions that I often get from students that either come for lessons, whether it's online or face-to-face, or I often look in the YouTube comments as well and other social media platforms, I see the similar types of questions, is about the start of the downswing. Now obviously the start of the downswing will differ. And a couple of reasons why it will differ. One, it will differ from sequencing. So not everybody kind of is looking for the same thing in a downswing. Some people, might want to really work on maximising distance, so they'll really work a lot on the lower body action and try to create a kinematic sequence from that effect. And other people are just trying to look to get the club more consistently on the back of the ball and might feel like everything is working more in tandem. Both of those are absolutely fine. The other thing that will generally define your backswing, your start to the downswing, and your friend's start to the downswing is it depends how you swing. If you kind of swing massively this way and over the top, and your friend kind of slides and gets stuck under plane, then obviously you're both going to have very differing starts to the downswing, if you know what I mean. But there's always one thing that I would say with most lessons, and again, it's happened a lot recently, where golfers have had lessons or they've had advice or whatever it might be, and they're aware that they can't start the downswing correctly, and a lot of this comes to the backswing position. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to sort of try and highlight the backswing, and one of the mistakes that I tend to see in a big way, and obviously how this will lend itself to a much better start to the downswing. So what I'm doing is, without a club first, the mistake that I tend to see is when golfers tell themselves the idea of rotation and they sacrifice sort of understanding a little bit of linear motion. So rotation, I'm going to do it with my hands across my shoulders so you guys can really see in terms of what the body's doing. They kind of end up doing something like this. Right? Now this is where your sort of upper body rotates over towards your right hand side, which in principle is not the worst thing to do in the world, but you can see the way that I'm moving, my head moves further towards my trail side, and I've also kind of flared my trail foot out as well, because again a lot of people tend to think, well, if I flare this out it helps me rotate more, and kind of true and false in many degrees. And that type of motion from the side perspective, if I draw a line in the back of my hips here, it kind of ends up translating in a loss of hip depth as well. So this sort of movement I would term is kind of turning over the leg. You're sort of turning over the leg, and we're not looking for that. What we're looking to do is turn into the leg. So for golfers who turn over the leg, it will often feel more like a sliding motion. So if I now keep my head still and I turn more into the leg, see what I'm doing? Over the leg, into the leg, okay? And then from the side perspective, turning over the leg and then into the leg. So when you turn into the leg, it gives you the ability to hold on to hip depth. Now, what you'll also find is when you do this type of motion correctly in terms of turning into the leg, it'll create a stronger activation in the glute, and it will make the start to the downswing considerably easier. Because again, somebody who turns sort of over the leg, it's kind of like, well, you've got nothing really to go off, right? It's kind of like there's no resistance in this trail side, so it's like I just end up turning as much as I possibly can, and it's like a real big effort to get any sort of movement happening at the start of the downswing. And even if you do get some movement happening at the start of the downswing, you run out of steam by the time you're getting towards the impact area. Whilst what we're trying to do is feel like this is creating an element of resistance, we turn the pelvis into this leg, so it's almost like as I turn into it, it fires me back through the resistance that's created. As opposed to if I flare it out, I can just sort of turn over it and just keep moving forever. Now, the thing that I'll always sort of advertise to students is this is Wedge Pro. Now some of you might be able to get access to a Wedge Pro. I think European countries you'll be able to go on Wedge Pro and be able to find a little bit about those. But companies like Callaway do a foot wedge as well. There are lots of things. If you kind of put golf wedge or golf foot wedge, probably more specific, you'll end up with something looking like this. Now the reason why I think this is so brilliant and it works so well with my students is because you place your trail foot on it and it sort of tilts your foot, right? So it kind of like a sprinter in the block now, you've almost got something that you can, instead of just the ground, you've got something that you can actually feel like you're trying to push into. And let's remove the club again, because I think it's easier without the club. So what I'm trying to encourage you guys to do is we don't want to be turning over this leg. Okay, this is the big move that we don't want to do. So what we want to do is we're going to try to keep our head still, and I want to turn my pelvis into my leg. So it's a sway. And this would be defined as the early backswing. So I would sort of allow my pelvis to sway in the takeaway move, and then we can trigger a recentering motion. But it's also acceptable to be like this a little bit at the top and then shift to the left in the downswing. What I'm trying to say is the big thing you don't want to do is this. So you put your hands across your shoulders, you put your wedge on the floor or something that you concoct of a similar notion, and then you just sort of work on trying to keep the trail leg flexed and just turn the pelvis into the leg. And it's like, consider it's like a rocking motion. Again, with a lot of students I try and say, look, you're going to rock the baby, you kind of do this, right? Not this. Okay, so like so. And then what you should start to notice is because your pelvis sort of shifts in towards your trail leg, you'll obviously feel a lot of weight pressure underneath that trail side while still staying centered. And you should also feel like a drop in the shoulder, because what you're doing is you're sort of tilting the pelvis by shifting a little bit in towards this leg. Now, there'll be lots of you that will be fearful of this video because you'll be like, oh no, I've always been told never, whatever you do, don't sway. And that's okay, but you've got to be a little bit more specific of what the definition of sway really means. Because we now know, thanks to biomechanical equipment, that we know that we have to have an element of sway from right to left in the golf swing. We have to be able to sequence it. It's the same as throwing a ball. You kind of sway a little to your right and to your left. You have to have some. So if you were to draw a line vertically through the outside part of my ankle line, if I surpass that, that would be a sway. But that's a big sway. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's an uncomfortable amount. Now, I would agree. There are some golfers out there that have a tendency to do this too much. But what I tend to encourage for those students is this drill. Because I think the reason why they end up sliding too much is because they don't really practice the trail leg creating a resistance. See, the pelvis, well, this is the key thing, the pelvis turns into the leg. So as my trail leg is trying to stay flexed, my trail leg is creating a bigger resistance so it can handle when the pelvis moves into it. And then obviously from there, like I say, you're going to get a stronger activation on the outside part of the trail leg. You're going to get a stronger activation in the glute because you're turning the pelvis into the leg. And then you're going to find it way easier to pull the lead side out of the way. So it's something that you need to practice and need to work on. Like I say, with most of my students who struggle in the backswing, this is the type of thing that I'd be educating them to do. Take away the golf club, put your hands across your shoulders, and just get that sort of feeling of that rocking motion. And then as time goes on, then you can try and work on elevating your arms. But you want to be trying to consciously keep this flexed so you can put pressure into the ground. And then that gives you the ability to sequence this type of motion, not flaring it out. So on the conversation of flaring the foot out, you can flare it out to the point where you can still create an element of resistance. If you flare this foot out too much, you won't be able to create resistance and you'll end up turning over the leg. So if you find that having it perpendicular is too restrictive, you can't turn at all, then you can flare it out a little bit. But what you don't want to do is go with the notion of flaring it out and just getting you back to the target, because you're just never going to get back to the golf ball. Similar to this, it's like if I throw, I'm going to go turn into my leg and it bounces me back, into my leg, bounces me back, into my leg, bounces me back, turn my foot out, turn, it doesn't bounce me back. And that's why you'll see with tour pros, if they turn in the backswing 40, 50 degrees, by the time they get to left arm horizontal, they've rotated 40, 50 degrees. And the reason why they manage that amount of rotation effortlessly is because they're activating the glute and they know how to use the ground in the backswing, so it's easy to pull the lead side back. That then lends itself to opening yourself up further. So hopefully, for those of you that struggle with the start of the downswing, this video has been useful. Let me know. I'll see you soon.